Hello, and welcome to WTF News, where unlike other networks, we don't pretend to give you objective news. Rather, here at WTF, we're proud to present our biased opinions on the major issues facing our society today. Issues ranging from gun safety to immigration, from religion to equal rights, and from Congress to God. This is Friday, October 25th, 2013. And I'm Dan Gersten, WTF News Anchor, and I'm opinionated as shit. I mean, not that shit has much of an opinion, or one that any of us might care to listen to. Just that there's a lot of shit out there, and we're here to talk about it with this segment of WTF, dedicated to the fucking GOP and Tea Party, especially those who disgrace this nation and its people in the very halls of our government. Congress. You know, the assholes who most recently displayed their disdain and disrespect for America and its government for, of, and by the people. You know, by shutting that government down like they were fucking union workers shutting down a factory because of unsafe working conditions or low pay or not enough benefits. But make no mistake, they're not union workers, and in fact are on record as being anti-union and pro-slave labor. And they're not protesting unsafe working conditions, low pay, or their benefits. Rather, they've got some of the cushiest jobs in the country. To begin with, in 2013, representatives receive an annual salary of $174,000, and leaders of both parties in both houses make about $20,000 more a year. Plus, the Speaker of the House, the incompetent and chicken shit John Boehner, gets paid a salary of almost $225,000 a year. I mean, talk about making big bucks for doing fucking little. Adding insult to injury, a Washington Post analysis of financial disclosures reported that from 1984 to 2009, and not including home equity, the average net worth of the 435 members of the House of Representatives more than doubled from $280,000 to $725,000. $725,000. I mean, can you fucking believe that? And that's on average. So you know some congressional thieves, made out like bandits. No question in my mind that people go to Congress these days not to serve the public's interest or some common good, but rather to increase their own fucking wealth and line their pockets and Cayman Island accounts. Additionally, they receive an attractive retirement plan after 5 years. Yeah, after only 5 years. And they are also provided with an annual allowance intended. And note the operative word intended to defray expenses related to carrying out their congressional duties, including official office expenses, staff, mail, travel between a member's district or state and Washington, D.C., and other goods and services, like hookers. In 2012, the average allowance per congressperson was $1,353,205.13, with some receiving as much as $1.5 million of our taxes. Within that amount, the office personnel allowance, for putting campaign contributors, friends, and family members on their staff to do nothing, was $944,671. Talk about nepotism and patronage. Lastly on the subject, members of Congress can retain their private careers and other business interests, though salary is limited to about $26,550 a year in 2013. However, and this is a big fucking however, there is no limit on the amount of non-salary income members can retain from investments, corporate dividends, or profits. Talk about a fucking racket. Why, they even had to pass 2 laws designed to inhibit insider trading on their part. Two laws, as if one law forbidding them from increasing their wealth from their acts wasn't good enough. So, if this wasn't to protest conditions, pay, or benefits, why shut down the fucking factory? To grasp the full nature of what happened and why, we kind of need to go back to 2008. When 2008 began, the United States was engaged in two major wars. The first was the war in Afghanistan, in retaliation for the 9/11/2001 terrorist attacks, and begun on October 7th, 2001. Presently, that conflict is winding down with withdrawal of most, if not all, troops by the end of 2014, thanks to President Barack Obama. By the end of fiscal year 2008, the war in Afghanistan had cost a little more than $171 billion and 412 American lives, with thousands more wounded physically and emotionally. And while neither of these amounts might sound like a lot, relatively speaking, we have to remember that there was a second war waging, for which we committed more dollars and victims. Armed forces. The second war was the war in Iraq, which we now know was started for bogus reasons about weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist, and an al-Qaeda presence, which also didn't exist. Misnamed Operation Iraqi Freedom, the war had nothing to do with 9/11, nothing to do with countering a potential threat to the U.S., and nothing to do with giving the Iraqi people freedom. Rather, it seems that manufactured war was about enriching weapons manufacturers, defense contractors, and members of the George W. Bush administration, especially Vice President Dick Cheney, whose Halliburton company, by the end of the conflict, had made $39.5 billion. Let that sink in for a minute. $39.5 billion of our dollars went to Halliburton. Talk about fucking the American people for money, not to mention the Iraqi people. Anyhow, on October 16th, 2002, George W. Bush signed a bill authorizing him to use force against Saddam Hussein and the people of Iraq, and hostilities commenced on March 19th, 2003. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush declared the mission accomplished, though in January of 2007, Bush had to announce a surge of 20,000 additional U.S. troops. Ain't so much for mission fucking accomplished, huh? Anyhow, that war would rage until December 2011, when the final U.S. troops left Iraq under President Obama's command. Through 2008, the war in Iraq cost over 4,200 American lives and resulted in the physical and emotional wounding of thousands more Americans and the deaths of over 100,000 Iraqis. Plus, by the end of fiscal year 2008, the war in Iraq had cost about $589 billion, bringing the total for the two wars by the end of fiscal 2008 to $761 billion. In addition to the two wars costing the nation $750 billion, fought, by the way, on borrowed money, the financial crisis, set in motion in large part by the bursting of the U.S. housing bubble, peaked in 2008. Briefly, this crisis resulted in a total collapse of large financial institutions, the bailout of banks by national governments, and downturns in stock markets around the world. In many areas, the housing market also suffered, resulting in evictions, foreclosures, and prolonged unemployment. The crisis also played a significant role in the failure of key businesses, declines in consumer wealth estimated in trillions of U.S. dollars, and a downturn of economic activity leading to the 2008-2012 global recession. In fact, it is said that between June 2007 and November 2008, Americans lost an estimated average of more than a quarter of their collective net worth, though not surprisingly, the most wealthy among us lost much less of their wealth. Duh. Anyhow, while many causes for the financial crisis have been suggested, the U.S. Senate's Levin-Coburn report asserted that the crisis was the result of high-risk, complex financial products, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and the failure of regulators, the credit rating agencies, and the market itself to rein in the excesses of Wall Street. In short, the crisis, considered by many economists the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s, was caused by the greed of wealthy people in the financial services industry. Bankers, mortgage lenders, investment firms, etc., as well as the greed of wealthy people who were the major shareholders in those companies. To address the threat of a total collapse of large financial institutions, the government took a number of measures in 2008, principal among which was TARP, or the Troubled Asset Relief Program. It was signed into law by President George W. Bush on October 3, 2008, not by President Obama, who wasn't even elected yet. So those of you blaming the bailing out of banks on Obama, take a fucking hike, you hateful idiots and liars. Anyhow, TARP was signed on October 3, 2008, with the purpose of purchasing assets and equity from financial institutions, which included Citicorp, Bank of America, AIG, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, PNC, U.S. Bancorp, American Express, Bank of New York Mellon Corporation, Discover Financial, and others, including Capital One. So, what's in your fucking wallet? Nothing, because we took it. Go fuck yourself. Now, while having a number of objectives, one important goal of TARP was to encourage banks to resume lending again, at levels seen before the crisis, both to each other and to consumers and business. However, it appears that this wasn't fully understood. Yeah, that's it. Understood, by bankers, and a review of investor presentations and conference calls by executives of some 24 U.S.-based banks by the New York Times found that few banks cited lending as a priority. Further, an overwhelming majority saw the program as a no-strings-attached windfall that could be used to pay down debt, acquire other businesses, or invest for the future. The article cited several bank chairmen as stating that they viewed the money as available for strategic acquisitions in the future rather than to increase lending to the private sector, whose ability to pay back the loans was suspect. Why, Plains Capital chairman Alan B. White saw the Bush administration's cash infusion as opportunity capital, noting, they didn't tell me I had to do anything particular with it. More specifically, during 2008, the financial institutions that received $295 billion in bailout money had spent $114 million on lobbying and campaign contribution, and banks that received bailout money had compensated their top executives nearly $1.6 billion in 2007, including salaries, cash bonuses, stock options, and benefits including personal use of company jets and chauffeurs, home security, country club membership, and professional money management. Seriously. These fuckers need to be in jail, and if it up to me, it'd be Guantanamo. Anyhow, here's the bottom line. When Obama was sworn in as president, he inherited an economic and financial mess worse than anything the U.S. had faced in decades. The worst financial and banking crisis since the Great Depression. A ballooning fiscal deficit projected to be as high as $1 trillion in 2009 and 2010. a huge current account deficit, a worsening credit crunch, a household sector where millions of households were insolvent, into negative equity territory and on the verge of losing their homes, a serious risk of deflation as the slack in goods, labor, and commodity markets was becoming deep, and other things. Collapsing retail sales and sharply falling industrial production, sharply falling employment, housing still in free fall, and home prices bound to fall 40% from the peak. Collapsing auto sales, forward-looking indicators of business and consumer confidence dropping to multi-decade lows, a sharp surge in corporate defaults, and a wrecked banking system and financial system. In short, the most daunting set of economic and financial challenges that any president has had to face since FDR during the Great Depression. So pardon me if I say on behalf of President Obama, thank you, W. Go fuck yourself. And if anybody wants to say, well, it's not all W's fault, well, again, go fuck yourself. When W took office, he inherited a surplus of $128 billion. Which might not seem like a lot, but hey, it was a surplus. A surplus that W promptly decided should be used to reward the most wealthy among us, which today is known as the Bush tax cuts. These cuts, coupled with 2 wars, the buildup of security post 9/11, and 2 recessions, one in 2001 and the other in 2008, resulted in his leaving office with a deficit as high as $11 trillion. Thank you, W. So, it's Inauguration Day, 2008. Welcome to Washington, President Obama. You've inherited a fucking mess. On the good news front, he had a cooperative Congress, the 111th U.S. Congress, that had been considered one of the most productive Congresses in history in terms of legislation being passed since Lyndon Johnson's era of the Great Society in the 89th Congress. And with this supportive Congress, Obama proceeded to tackle the many problems that the nation and its people face. Among the accomplishments during the first 2 years of Obama's first term was legislation helping children, helping families save their homes, and a number of measures designed to help the nation recover while curbing abuses by the fucking financial and banking industries. But the 3 main accomplishments, in my opinion, and ones that would help define Obama's presidency, as well as surface social issues that impact us today in 2013, are the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, which stated that the 180-day statute of limitations for filing an equal pay lawsuit regarding pay discrimination resets with each new paycheck affected by that discriminatory action. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act of 2010, which allowed gays, lesbians, and bisexuals to serve openly in the U.S. Armed Forces. And the epic Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010, which, coupled with the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act, represented the most significant regulatory overhaul of the nation's healthcare system since the passage of Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. The Affordable Care Act, called Obamacare by those who oppose it for no reason other than to generate and leverage hate, aims to increase the quality and affordability of health insurance, lower the uninsured rate by expanding public and private insurance coverage, and reduce the cost of health care for individuals and the government. It provides a number of mechanisms, including mandates, subsidies, and insurance exchanges to increase coverage and affordability. The law also requires insurance companies to cover all applicants within new minimum standards and offer the same rates regardless of pre-existing conditions or gender. Additional reforms aim to reduce costs and improve healthcare outcomes by shifting the systems toward quality over quantity through increased competition, regulation, and incentives to stream the delivery of health care. The Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, projected that the Affordable Care Act will lower both future deficits and Medicare spending. Now, almost as soon as it was passed by both houses of Congress and signed by President Obama, Republicans and Tea Parties, politicians, pundits, and their wealthy backers have sought to repeal the law for one reason and one reason only. Though, they'll never directly admit to this reason. And it's that the Affordable Care Act directly limits predatory, greedy, wealthy people. You know, the ones who were instrumental in causing the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008 with their greed. Well, it limits or curbs them from making as much as they can get away with off of the health of Americans. No more denials of coverage. No more denials of claims. No more turning down applicants because of pre-existing conditions. No more gouging customers with outrageously high premiums. And no more spending those premiums, not on health care, but on administrative costs to further line the pockets of already wealthy executives and shareholders. Additionally, in calling the Affordable Care Act Obamacare, they're hoping that their ignorant base won't realize that it was modeled after a health reform program instituted by Obama's opponent in 2012, Mitt Romney, when he was governor of Massachusetts, or that elements of it were first proposed by the Heritage Foundation, a wrong-wing think tank, which proudly took credit for the ideas in Romneycare and now acts as if those ideas weren't theirs. They label it socialism. They point to it as government interference into the lives of Americans. They say it will result in Obama death squads, as the government will now be responsible for making healthcare-related decisions. What a fucking load of crap. As if it wasn't the health insurance companies who weren't making those decisions. Denying coverage and claims and turning down applicants. Again, this is just about fucking wealthy folks not liking the idea of a government protecting its citizens from their predatory practices just to become even more wealthy. And in this regard, it's no different than their opposition to regulations designed to protect citizens from their polluting the environment, selling unsafe food, having unsafe workplaces, or nickel and diming with bank and credit card fees and rates. Really. Their oppositions to the ACA is just that. The whine of greedy, wealthy folk that, oh, you're not allowing us to make money, blah. Somebody give them a fucking hanky. Why? They even challenged the Affordable Care Act in a lawsuit brought before the U.S. Supreme Court, which on June 28, 2012, upheld the constitutionality of the Obamacare's individual mandate, although holding that states cannot be forced to participate in its Medicaid expansion under penalty of losing their Medicaid funding. And today, efforts to oppose, undermine, repeal, and defund Obamacare are still supported by Republican and Tea Party politicians, pundits, advocacy groups, and of course, by predatory, greedy, wealthy people. To date, the Republican Tea Party-controlled House of Representatives has unsuccessfully voted 46 times to repeal, defund, or dismantle Obamacare. And they tied their opposition to Obamacare to shutting down the government. Why, they even took the position that the shutdown was the fault of Obama and congressional Democrats for not negotiating with them on Obamacare. Unfucking believable. Negotiating on Obamacare? First off, it's a fucking law, passed by both houses of Congress, signed by the president, and upheld by the fucking Supreme Court. You don't negotiate a law. You negotiate as a potential law is being discussed, and the Republicans and Tea Partiers had their chance back in 2009. Plus, Obamacare was a major issue in the 2012 presidential election. In re-electing the president, Americans basically said that Obamacare was not an issue with them, but that wrong-wing threats to repeal it was an issue. Now, before we talk more about the shutdown and what it says about those who shut it down, I believe we have to go back to Obama's first term in office, or more specifically, the 2010 midterm elections. At stake was all 435 seats in the House of Representatives, 37 of the 100 seats in the Senate, 38 states and territorial governorships, and 46 state legislatures, with the exception of Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Virginia. All told, the Democratic Party suffered massive defeats in many national and state-level elections, with many seats switching to Republican and Tea Party control. Importantly, the Republicans and Tea Party gained 63 seats in the House of Representatives, recapturing the majority. It was the largest seat change since 1948 and the largest for any midterm election since 1938. Republicans and Tea Partiers also gained 6 seats in the Senate, but they continued to be in a minority position. On a state level, Republicans and Tea Partiers gained 680 seats in state legislatures, allowing them to control 25 state legislatures, while Democrats only controlled 15. Additionally, there was a Republican or Tea Party governor of 29 states. Some analysts believe that it was self-declared independent voters who were largely responsible for the shift from Democratic to Republican gains. Others say that the election of a black president drove Republicans, Tea Partiers, and other haters to the polls, while Democrats were either still celebrating Obama's '08 victory and foolishly thought that America had changed to be more liberal or progressive. Whatever the reason, Democrats, liberals, and progressives were caught with their pants down, handing Obama a Congress that only cared about obstruction and making him a one-term president. This obsession in making Obama a one-term president was perhaps no more clearly stated than it was by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in an interview that appeared in the National Journal on October 23, 2010. The single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. And here's Mitch reaffirming that obsession.
What can Americans expect from Republicans now? Let's start with the big picture. Over the past week, some have said it was indelicate of me to suggest that our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term. But the fact is, if our primary legislative goals are to repeal and replace the health spending bill, to end the bailouts, cut spending, and shrink the size and scope of government, the only way to do all of those things is to put someone in the White House who won't veto any of these things.
Mitch went on to say, "We can only hope that the president will start listening to the electorate after Tuesday's election. But we can't plan on it. And it would be foolish to expect that Republicans will be able to completely reverse the damage Democrats have done as long as a Democrat holds the veto pen." Unfucking believable. I mean, we can only hope that the president will start listening to the electorate? Yeah, just like the fucking Republicans and Tea Parties listened to the electorate after the '08 and '12 elections, huh? And just like they listened to Americans who support gun safety legislation or didn't want a government shutdown. I mean, just a fucking bunch of hypocrites. And to then imply that the poor little Republicans and Tea Partiers won't be able to completely reverse the damage Democrats have done? I mean, give me a fucking break. How about reversing the damage the W administration did? I mean, how about reversing the economic mess W left? Huh? Making it appear as if the Affordable Care Act is damaged, when it originally was a Heritage Foundation concept and instituted in the state of Massachusetts by Mitt Romney, their 2012 presidential candidate. I mean, give me a fucking break. So, anyhow, After the midterm elections of 2010, we now have our president having to deal with the 112th Congress of the U.S., which ran from January 3rd, 2011 and ended on January 3rd, 2013. The 112th Congress. Talk about a dysfunctional organization. Largely due to there being a Republican and Tea Party-controlled House, with a Speaker, John Boehner, afraid of his own shadow, and a Republican and Tea Party minority in the Senate that had, when they were the majority, subverted the rules so that a simple majority was no longer sufficient in a number of instances, and that 60 votes were now needed to override a filibuster. Looking back, the 112th Congress is now widely recognized as the most politically polarized Congress since Reconstruction, with record low approval ratings. And let me say this again, the most politically polarized Congress since Reconstruction. Which was after the Civil War 150 or so years ago. Now, the reason I wanted to make a point of this is because I don't think we should kid ourselves into thinking that the Civil War ended or that Reconstruction was successful. Rather, that war is still being fought, especially by Tea Partiers residing in former Confederate states, waving Confederate battle flags as if it was some symbol of honor and some just defiance against tyranny, as well as proudly proclaiming that the South will rise again. Fuck. Nothing but a load of hateful crap from people who haven't accepted that they lost the Civil War, and that while people did die honorably for their cause, that the cause itself was unjust and not honorable, namely to dissolve the Union and preserve slavery. And nothing brought their being hateful sore losers more home than America putting a black man in their white plantation house. But, I digress. So back to the 112th Congress. On the second day of the 112th Congress, Republicans and Tea Partiers read a modified version of the Constitution on the floor of the House. The first time in history that the Constitution was modified for a political agenda. More specifically, they conveniently left out the part that stated why we have three branches of government. As a refresher, especially for those out there who love to pick and choose parts of the Constitution and often misinterpret those parts, while ignoring the parts of it with which they don't agree. Congress, while creating laws, is the lesser of the three branches of government. In leaving this out of their reading, it became pretty clear that the Republican and Tea Party members of Congress have little respect for the Constitution and view it as curbing their absolute power they seek. Got that? Curbing the absolute power they seek. Like the Affordable Care Act and other government regulations curbing the absolute wealth they and their wealthy owners seek. Anyhow, shortly after this disrespect, they revealed their cowardice a few days later when Congressman Gabrielle Giffords from Arizona and 19 other people were shot by a gunman in Tucson. And rather than working on new legislation to protect their own members, not to mention average Americans, they went on recess for 1 week until media news died down. What a bunch of NRA pawns and fucking chicken shits. Upon reconvening, the House of Representatives failed to pass a 2011 budget, and this nearly led to a shutdown of non-essential government services on April 9th of that year, with the furlough of 800,000 government employees appearing imminent. In the days preceding the deadline, the president met with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and Speaker John Boehner, but an agreement couldn't be reached, and a 1-week budget proposal to avoid a government shutdown, allowing more time for negotiations, resulted in nada, nothing, zippo. Spending cuts wanted by Republicans and Tea Parties, especially to Planned Parenthood, were opposed by Senate Democrats, and Obama indicated that he would veto any budget containing Republican and Tea Party cuts to social programs. Imagine, Republicans and Tea Partiers using budget negotiations as a way to advance their war on women, most notably on a woman's right to choose and make health care and life-related decisions for herself. I mean, just a bunch of fucking women haters believing women are subservient to men and should just stay in the kitchen, breed, and service them. Anyhow, an agreement was worked out between the two parties for a one-week budget to allow for more time to negotiate after Republicans and Tea Partiers dropped their stance on Planned Parenthood issue, and the two parties ultimately agreed on a 2011 federal budget the following week. But this would not be the only time that the 112th Congress, or more specifically Republican and Tea Party obstructionists, would attempt to hijack the U.S. government in return for cutting spending on social programs, increasing the defense budget, and keeping tax breaks for the most wealthy of Americans, many of whom donated to their political campaigns, and for want of a less accurate term, own them in place, if not giving them even greater breaks. For after all, as they were labeled, they were the job creators. Job creators. I mean, give me a fucking break. If anything, history has shown time and again that when the most wealthy among us are given tax breaks, they don't create jobs and they don't stimulate economic growth. So, enter the 2011 debt ceiling crisis, manufactured by Republican and Tea Party obstructionists in Congress. The Treasury estimated that the borrowing authority of the U.S. would be exhausted on August 2nd, 2011. And as has been done in the past, with presidents of either party in office, Congress would need to authorize an increase in the debt ceiling. Now, in the past, raising the debt ceiling was a no-brainer, and Congress routinely did this regardless of who was residing in the White House. Under Reagan, it was raised 18 times. Under Clinton, 4 times. Under W, 7 times. And under Obama, it had been raised twice before the crisis without threat of being hijacked or held hostage. But no, not with this 112th Congress, one with Republicans and Tea Partiers, whose one openly declared mission was to make Obama a one-term president. I mean, even if it meant the country defaulting on its debts, having the nation's credit rating lowered like it was some fucking deadbeat dad, I mean, possibly having negative global economic repercussions, and otherwise fucking America and Americans. So, as the time when the borrowing authority of the United States being exhausted near, Republicans and Tea Partiers said they would approve a debt ceiling increase in exchange for a complex deal of significant spending cuts, which focused largely on social programs and agencies responsible for safeguarding our food, wealth, and environment, while not touching spending on defense and weaponry, which they actually wanted to increase, or cutting billions in subsidies given to profit-making corporations and industries. In other words, basically using a potential default to extort their transferring of public money from the people to themselves and their wealthy backers, well, owners. This manufactured by Republican and Tea Party crisis sparked the most volatile week for financial markets since the 2008 crisis, which, as we all hopefully recognize, Republicans also created. I mean, with the stock market trending significantly downward. Additionally, the credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded the credit rating of the United States government for the first time in our nation's history. On July 31st, 2011, President Obama announced that the leaders of both parties in both chambers had reached an agreement that would reduce the deficit and avoid default. This agreement, entitled the Budget Control Act of 2011, passed the House on August 1st and the Senate on August 2nd, and it was signed by the President shortly after passing the Senate. Now, anyone who believes that this resolved the issues of deficit reduction and where to cut spending, or that it prevented future manufactured economic crises, really hasn't been paying attention, or doesn't have the mental capacity to follow what's been going on in our nation today. I mean, perhaps programmed and brainwashed by wrong-wing politicians, pundits, and talking heads. Anyhow, back to our story. The Budget Control Act of 2011 brought conclusion to the 2011 debt ceiling crisis. It involved the introduction of several complex mechanisms, such as creation of the Congressional Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, sometimes called the Super Committee, options for a balanced budget amendment, and automatic budget sequestration. It called for $1.2 trillion in budget cuts that would be spread over 9 years and equally divided between domestic and defense-related spending. Now, here's the kicker. There was no fucking way that Congress could overcome their partisanship to agree on what to cut. Especially since, again, Republicans and Tea Partiers didn't want to do anything that might make Obama appear successful. So they agreed on this super committee, made up of 12 Congress members split between political parties and the two chambers of Congress. That it would meet and work out an agreement. Like that was ever going to happen. What bullshit. When one party in Congress, Republicans and Tea Parties, had repeatedly demonstrated an unwillingness to negotiate or compromise, despite proclaiming a willingness to do so, did anyone really think that some congressional super committee was going to be able to work together to work things out? Really, come now. All it did was extend the inevitable and waste more taxpayer money. Personally, I've had it with all these fucking committees. It's like corporate America with all these fucking meetings taking time away from actually getting stuff done. So anyhow, the Super Committee held an organizational meeting on September 8, 2011. And on November 21st, the committee concluded its work, issuing a statement that began with the following. After months of hard work and intense deliberations, we have come to the conclusion today that it will not be possible to make any bipartisan agreement available to the public before the committee's deadline. What a fucking non-surprise. On January 1st, 2012, the Super Committee was formally terminated. It should be noted that many of the meetings held by the Super Committee were closed to the public, and that only 5 public hearings were held. Furthermore, the records of the closed sessions have been ordered sealed for 20 years, so we unfortunately won't know what exactly happened and what a waste of time and money it really was. Even so, the inability of the Super Committee and the inability of Congress months earlier to work together led to 3 more major manufactured economic crises. The United States fiscal cliff in January 2013, the sequester, a set of automatic spending cuts to begin March 1st, 2013, and most recently, a 16-day shutdown of the U.S. government that began on October 1st, 2013, when Congress failed to enact legislation appropriating funds for fiscal year 2014. However, before we talk about the crises manufactured by Republican and Tea Partiers, let's revisit the 112th Congress. They set back the recovery. In 2011, the economy seemed to be gathering momentum. In February, it added 220,000 jobs. In March, it added 246,000 jobs. In April, 251,000 jobs. But as markets began to take the Republican threats on the debt ceiling more seriously, the economy sputtered. Between May and August, the nation never added more than 100,000 jobs a month. And then, in September, the month after the debt ceiling was resolved, the economy sped back up and added more than 200,000 jobs. In addition, consumer confidence began falling right around May 11th, when Boehner the Bonehead first announced he would not support increasing the debt limit. According to a column in Bloomberg, it went into free fall as the political stalemate worsened through July. After July 31st, when the deal to break the impasse was announced, consumer confidence stabilized and began a long, slow climb that brought it back to its starting point almost a year later. What's perhaps worse is after hurting the economy, Mitch McConnell said, whoever the new president is probably going to be asking us to raise the debt ceiling again. Then we will go through the process again. And Bonehead Boehner was even more direct, saying we shouldn't dread the debt limit, we should welcome it. Welcome it? Welcome upsetting Americans? Welcome delaying a recovery from something that they themselves, under W, caused? Truly, they are despicable people, and in my opinion, should be regarded as domestic terrorists and enemies of the state. So, let's see what else the 112th Congress did or didn't do. They didn't pass legislation, passing about 220 bills, with many of them minor or ceremonial. They lost our credit rating. Their incompetency and inability to work together led to the sequester, which we'll discuss shortly. They continually voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they continually failed in this attempt. To date, they, and whatever time the 113th Congress has been seated, Republican and Tea Partiers have tried to repeal, defund, delay, and otherwise upset the Affordable Care Act 46 times in Congress. And that's only in Congress. On a state level, there have been all kinds of maneuvers by Republican and Tea Party-controlled legislatures to defeat Obamacare and keep it from their residents. Additionally, each time Republicans and Tea Partiers vote against Obamacare, it takes time away from other issues. Though, truth be told, they're against anything that would make Obama look or be successful, even if it hurts America and Americans. And by the way, a report from Standard & Poor's found that each time Republicans and Tea Partiers vote to repeal Obamacare in the House, it costs taxpayers $1.45 million. So by August 2013, when they had voted for a 40th time to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they had cost taxpayers a grand total of $54 million. $54 fucking million of taxpayer money. And to think that Republicans and Tea Partiers claim to be the party of fiscal conservatism and financial responsibility. Bullshit. What a fucking load of crap. Lastly, Republicans and Tea Partiers in the 112th Congress refused to work on actual problems and instead manufactured economic-related crises or ones like an IRS scandal that didn't exist, a weapons sting operation that failed but was started during the W administration, and Benghazi. Benghazi! Hell, it was a tragedy for sure, but seriously now, there were 11 attacks on our embassies during W's administration, and more Americans were killed during those attacks than were killed in Benghazi. Funny how we didn't hear a peep about those attacks when they occurred from those now using the tragedy at Benghazi for their own political agenda. What a bunch of fucking bastards. So, the 112th Congress, controlled by Republicans and Tea Partiers. No major job bills, even for returning veterans. No legislation to improve our crumbling infrastructure. No progress on immigration reform. No progress on gun safety legislation, even though innocent adults and children are gunned down every day by mentally and emotionally challenged people or due to the negligence of those enabling access to a loaded weapon. Climate change? No fucking way, especially since they deny that it's even happening. Anyhow, 2012 was an election year, and the results of that election would show whether all of the obstruction and all of the manufacturing of crises were effective in Republicans and Tea Parties achieving their primary goal of making Obama a one-term president. Now, for those of you who suffered from Rip Van Winkle disease in 2012 and, just woke up, the election pitted Democrats, President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, against the Republican and Tea Party candidates Mitt Romney, former governor of Massachusetts, and vulture a venture capitalist, and Representative Paul Ryan of Wisconsin. The campaigns focused on domestic issues, and the debate centered largely around the economic recovery and job creation. Other issues included long-term federal budget issues, the future of social insurance programs, and the Affordable Care Act. Foreign policy was also discussed, including the phase-out of the Iraq War, the size and spending on the military, and appropriate counteractions to terrorism. And of course, Romney couldn't let go of Benghazi. In retrospect, many feel that the election was a national referendum on the Affordable Care Act, since it was a major issue in the campaign. Needless to say, the president and vice president were supportive of it, while Romney and Ryan did whatever they could to paint it as a flawed law. Part of the difficulty in this, again, was that Romney, when governor of Massachusetts, instituted his own health care reform program, dubbed Romney Care, which again was based on concepts first advanced by the Heritage Foundation, a wrong-wing think tank. Plus, Romney was on record as having given himself credit for the ideas within Obamacare when it became law. I mean, this contradiction on the part of Romney was but one of many flip-flops that he made from relatively moderate positions he had held in the past, like supporting Planned Parenthood, to more radical conservative views in order to pander to the ignorant and hateful base of Republican and Tea Party supporters, who, by the way, may only have reluctantly supported Romney because they hated and distrusted Obama more than they did he. Why, Romney even flip-flopped on positions and statements he had made or taken during the course of a day. Anyhow, after it seemed that the campaign would never end, the American people spoke. President Obama won both the popular vote and the Electoral College with 332 electoral votes to Romney's 206. He became the 11th president and third Democrat to win a majority of the popular vote more than once, and won this election with 5 million more votes than received by Romney-Ryan. Perhaps riding on Obama's coattails, and perhaps in response to having fallen asleep in 2010, Americans came out and voted for Democrats, who solidified their majority in the Senate with a gain of 2 seats, and while still the minority in the House, gained 8 seats and received, on a national basis, over 1.4 million more votes than Republicans and Tea Partiers. After the election results, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said, "Now that the election is over, it's time to put politics aside and work together to find solutions." Predictably, Speaker of the House John Boehner offered to work with any willing partner to get things done, and then said, "The American people want solutions, and tonight they've responded by renewing our majority." He also said that by keeping Republicans in control of the House, that voters made clear there is no mandate for raising taxes, which Obama had proposed doing on households earning over $250,000 a year. So, imagine. You didn't make Obama a one-term president. You lost both the Electoral College and the popular vote by 5 million votes. You lost seats in both the Senate and the House, and while you held on to the House, you may have done so with the aid of gerrymandered districts in states controlled by Republican and Tea Party legislatures and governors. And you had the gall to suggest that the American people gave you a fucking mandate? I mean, seriously. Senate Minority Leader McConnell said that the voters, all 65 plus million of them, have not endorsed the failures or excesses of the president's first term, but rather have given him more time to finish the job. He went on to say, to the extent he wants to move to the political center, which is where the work gets done in a divided government, we'll be there to meet him halfway. Halfway? For the past 4 years, all through Obama's first term, Republicans, and especially the Tea Partyers within them, have never gone halfway on any issue to work with Democrats or the president. And contrary to what bonehead Boehner has said, you knew there was going to be no fucking way for Republicans and Tea Partyers in the House working with any willing partner. As we saw in their shutdown of the government in 2013, their idea of working with a willing partner is to have that partner agree to all of their terms or else. Plus, if there was any hint of compromise, Republicans ran the risk of being primaried by a wrong-wing Tea Partyer. Anyhow, welcome back to Washington, Mr. President. Here's hoping your second term has a more cooperative Congress. The 113th Congress, which commenced on January 3rd, 2013, and will run until January 3rd, 2015. I mean, surely the Republican and Tea Party mission to make you a one-term president can no longer be their number one goal. I mean, right? Well, not so fast. I mean, if anyone thought that the 2012 election, with Obama being reelected, would make Congress more productive, less dysfunctional, less partisan, or more together in terms of promoting the general good, you're as fucking delusional as are many Republicans and Tea Partiers, just in a different way. The first manufactured crisis that the reelected president, had to face was the United States fiscal cliff, a situation that came into existence in January 2013 when a series of previously enacted laws were to simultaneously come into effect. The Bush tax cuts of 2001 that had been extended for 2 years by the 2010 Tax Relief Act were set to expire on December 31st, 2012, and planned spending cuts under the Budget Control Act of 2011, known as the sequester, also came into play. In short, the fiscal cliff would result in higher tax rates and a decrease in government spending through sequestration, and lead to an operating deficit, the amount by which government spending exceeds revenue. In addition, the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, had estimated that the fiscal cliff could have likely led to a mild recession with higher unemployment in 2013. In July 2012, the Democratic-controlled Senate voted to pass a bill supporting the president's tax proposal, which extended the Bush tax cuts for 98% of taxpayers while allowing them to lapse for the top 2%. Republicans and Tea Partyers in the Senate countered by saying the cut should be extended for all, but that was rejected. However, and not surprisingly, given that they are owned by the top 2%, the Republican and Tea Party-controlled House of Representatives rejected the president's tax proposal on August 1st, 2012, and instead proposed that the Bush tax cuts be extended in their entirety, even though the CBO estimated that extending these cuts for the 2013-2022 time period would add $3.18 trillion to the national debt. In November 2012, President Obama expressed a preference for replacing the more blunt cuts of the sequester with more targeted cuts, while raising income tax levels on the top 2% of earners. Senior White House officials recommended a veto of any bill that, 1, averted defense cuts while leaving intact non-defense cuts, or 2, excluded an increase in tax rates for top earners. On December 3rd, 2012, Boehner proposed a Republican Tea Party plan that included $2.2 trillion in deficit cuts over a decade. Revenue would be generated mainly by reducing tax expenditures, in other words, exemptions and deductions, rather than increasing income tax rates. Further, it included raising the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 67 and slowing increases in Social Security costs by reducing cost of living adjustments. Boy, do they really resist raising taxes on their wealthy owners? Don't they? And boy, aren't they tenacious in going after social programs when keeping defense-related spending high? On December 18, 2012, Boehner announced that a new Plan B would be taken up by the House. which would raise tax rates for those who earn over $1 million. Not surprisingly, again, by December 20th, 2012, he was forced to pull the measure when it became clear that House Republicans and Tea Partiers would not support it. Again, not surprising since they're owned by millionaires and billionaires. On January 1st, 2013, the Senate passed a compromise bill, the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012. However, as with any other bill passed in the Senate, it faced uncertain prospects in the House of Representatives as Eric Cantor, the majority leader, said that he did not support it. However, it appears that Cantor's resistance was not real, and the House passed the bill without amendments later that day. In short, that bill delayed the budget sequestration by 2 months to give time for further negotiations on deficit reduction. And it included $600 billion over 10 years in new tax revenue, about 1/5 of the revenue that would have been raised had no legislation been passed. The bill's passage came after days of negotiations between Senate leaders and the Obama administration, with the final agreement being attributed to talks between Vice President Joe Biden and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Some Democrats criticized the bill for not raising taxes on the wealthy more, while Republicans and Tea Partiers, again not surprisingly, criticized it for raising tax rates while not providing explicit spending cuts, their familiar old song. All in all, the dreaded fiscal cliff was averted, but in retrospect, it only put off the second economic crisis of 2013, the sequestration fight, by 2 months. Of note, with the delay of 2 months, the sequestration fight was now expected to occur during negotiations over a debt limit increase that was expected to be needed sometime in February. However, and get a load of this, on January 23, 2013, the Republican and Tea Party-led House passed a bill suspending the debt ceiling until May 18, 2013. A bill that did not include any offsetting budget cuts, as Republicans had previously stated as a precondition for raising the debt limit. The move was seen as an attempt to delay a showdown on a debt limit, given their experience with the 2011 debt ceiling crisis, as well as the recent Democratic gains in the 2012 elections. In other words, they pushed back the time for discussing the next debt ceiling in order to give themselves yet another opportunity to threaten the economy of the U.S. for their own political agenda. On March 1, 2013, the sequester went into effect, with automatic spending cuts evenly split between defense and non-defense categories, though major programs like Social Security, Medicaid, federal pensions, and veterans benefits were exempt, and Medicare spending was to be reduced by a fixed 2% a year. Federal pay rates were to be unaffected, though furloughs, involuntary unpaid time off, were a result. Prior to going into effect, both parties in Congress proposed ways for stopping or mitigating the automatic cuts, none of which was seriously considered by the opposing party. On December 20th, 2012, the Republican House had narrowly passed a bill which would have replaced only the defense side of the sequester, with cuts to programs including food stamps, Dodd-Frank, well, that's a law that regulated predatory behavior of banks and Wall Street, and of course, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Again, what a fucking non-surprise. In February, with their reduced majority, key Republicans and Tea Partiers admitted that they would not be able to pass the bill again, even in the House. Nevertheless, many wrong-wingers believed that the bill would serve as a template for what they wanted: no tax increases, no defense cuts, and considerable domestic spending reductions. Is anyone getting tired of this fucking song over and over again? I know I am. On February 8th, Democratic Chris Van Hollen, a ranking member of the House Budget Committee, introduced new taxes and reduced spending to fend off the sequestration, including a minimum tax rate of 30% on individuals making more than $1 million a year, a repeal of some oil subsidy loopholes, a reduction in farm subsidy payments, and an increase in flood insurance premiums. On February 14th, Patty Murray, Democratic chairwoman of the Senate Budget Committee, proposed to replace the 2013 sequester with $110 billion in spending cuts and tax increases. Like the House version, these policies also included a Buffett rule tax, the closure of oil subsidies, and cuts to farm subsidies. Additionally, this bill would have cut defense spending for 2013 in excess of the amounts required by the current sequester. Lastly, and not surprisingly, wrong-wing interest groups FreedomWorks and the Conservative Action Project said that the sequester should be replaced by defunding Obamacare. That is, eliminating the refundable tax credits that form the basis of the federal health exchanges, the Medicare expansion matching funds, and the increased funding for the Community Health Center Fund and Prevention and Public Health Fund. Again, unfucking believable. I mean, it's amazing how those Republicans and Tea Partiers will do whatever they can to ensure that their wealthy owners can continue to rake in big bucks, preying on the health of Americans without the government stepping in to make affordable health care available to Americans. A May 19, 2013 poll conducted by ABC News and the Washington Post found that 37% of Americans say they've been negatively affected by the sequester, with 18% saying that they felt a major impact. So what are some of the things that have been impacted? Well, Head Start programs are shrinking and children are being turned away. Public defenders are facing furloughs and federal courts are getting bogged down. Federal housing programs are starting to deny aid. National parks are scaling back their services. The military is starting to see cuts materialize with deployment cancellations and delays, increased uncertainties with regard to scheduled moves, and cuts in furloughs impacting the education of children on military bases. Some federal agencies have begun to furlough their employees. Cancer clinics are turning away patients. States are paring back unemployment benefits. It should be noted that while Congress has basically accepted these sequester cuts, with little action on their part to stop or lessen their impact, they had no problem rushing in to fix two problems caused by the sequester. In March of 2013, lawmakers found $55 million to prevent the furlough of 8,400 U.S. meat inspectors. After all, those Congress folks sure love their beef. And in April of 2013, they overwhelmingly approved a bill to allow the Transportation Department to shift as much as $253 million to the air traffic control system in order to counter air traffic delays. I guess their wealthy owners didn't like having their private jets delayed. Not to mention all the travel between Washington and the home states and districts of Congress members. It seems Congress doesn't give a crap about the suffering of Americans, but when it comes down to their own convenience being inconvenienced, well, that's another fucking story, isn't it? So here it is, May 2013, and we've averted a fiscal cliff and allowed the sequester to go into effect. Now what? Well, there's always holding the raising of the debt ceiling hostage. Again. Originally to be discussed in March, the No Budget, No Pay Act of 2013 was signed by President Obama in February 2013, which suspended the U.S. debt ceiling through May 18, 2013. Needless to say, while the bill passed in the Senate, all Republican and Tea Party senators voted against the bill, because they wanted any debt ceiling increase to be accompanied by comparable spending cuts in, you guessed it, social programs. In the House, the bill was approved by both parties as Republicans and Tea Partiers were more interested in there being a budget passed by April 15, 2013, than anything related to the debt ceiling. On May 19th, the debt ceiling was reinstated. On August 26, 2013, the Treasury informed Congress that if the debt ceiling was not again raised, that the U.S. would be forced to default on its debt sometime in mid-October 2013, right about the time when Congress would need to pass an appropriations bill to keep the government up and running. Or in other words, when it would be put up or shut down time. And we know how that turned out, don't we? So here's some background leading up to the shutdown, which should make it perfectly clear whose idea it was and who the shutter-downers are. In January 2013, Republican Senator John Cornyn of fucking Texas wrote, "It may be necessary to partially shut down the government in order to secure the long-term fiscal well-being of our country, rather than plod along the path of Greece, Italy, and Spain." The New York Times later reported that soon after Obama began his second term that month, a coalition of conservative activists, led by former Reagan administration Attorney General Ed Meese, one of the greasiest members of that administration, and an emeritus fellow of the Heritage Foundation, began developing plans to defund the Affordable Care Act, strategizing that they would be able to block implementation of the Affordable Care Act if they could persuade congressional Republicans to threaten cutting off financing for the entire federal government. Mises' coalition produced a blueprint to defunding Obamacare. The plan, which said conservatives should not approve a CR, or that's a continuing resolution, unless it defunds Obamacare, was signed by leaders of more than 36 conservative groups. Got that? The shutdown was proposed by a GOP senator in January of 2013, and a plan to shut down the government in order to defund Obamacare was signed by more than 36 leaders of conservative groups. So when some Republican, Tea Partier, or wrong-winger says it wasn't them who caused the shutdown, tell them to go fuck themselves. Additionally, conservative groups supported by funds from the billionaire Koch brothers, the wannabe Führers of the American Fascist Party, well, they and conservative political action committees, otherwise known as PACs, worked with Tea Party-affiliated members of Congress, such as Senators Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, to promote an appropriations bill that would exclude funds for the Affordable Care Act. In July and August 2013, Senator Lee of Utah, along with fellow Tea Party-affiliated senators Ted Cruz of Texas, Marco Rubio of Florida, and Rand Paul of Kentucky, lobbied their colleagues in the Senate to support a letter written by Lee calling for defunding the Affordable Care Act. The letter was eventually signed by 19 senators, although 5 of the co-signatories later withdrew their support. In the House, freshman Representative Mark Meadows of North Carolina circulated a similar letter that was signed by 80 House members. The New York Daily News wrote that it was Meadows' letter that had put the federal government on the road to shutdown, noting that calls to defund the Affordable Care Act through spending bills, they had languished until Meadows wrote an open letter on August 21, 2013 to House Speaker John Boehner and Majority Leader Eric Cantor, asking them to defund the Affordable Care Act in any appropriation bills brought to the House floor. Joshua Withrow of the Tea Party group Freedom Works, which had endorsed the Mises coalition plan months earlier, explained the overall strategy, writing in August 2013 that the continuing resolution, due to expire September 30th, must be renewed in order for the doors to stay open in Washington. The CR is the best chance we will get to withdraw funds from Obamacare. This can be done by attaching bills by Senator Ted Cruz or Republican Congressman Ted Graves of Georgia to the CR, which will totally defund Obamacare. He added, Senator Mike Lee and Congressman Mark Meadows are leading the charge to get their colleagues to commit to this approach by putting their signatures to a letter affirming that they will refuse to vote for a CR that contains Obamacare funding. So again, when some Tea Partier or wrong-winger says it wasn't they who caused the shutdown, tell them to go fuck themselves. Anyhow, shortly after these letters had been signed or not signed, conservative groups ran negative media campaigns to pressure congressional Republicans who had doubted the strategy into supporting it. The Senate Conservatives Fund ran radio ads against Republican senators who didn't support the effort to defund Obamacare. Heritage Action ran critical internet ads in the districts of 100 Republican lawmakers who didn't sign the Meadows letter. In August and September 2013, Heritage Action, Tea Party Patriots, For America, and 5 other Tea Party groups embarked on nationwide tours to pressure Republican members of Congress to join the effort to defund the Affordable Care Act, and in early September, Tea Party Patriots created a defunding toolkit, which included talking points in case House Republicans were blamed for a shutdown. The suggested answer was, we are simply calling to fund the entire government, except for the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. Yeah, that's the fucking ticket. We're simply calling to fund the entire government except for Obamacare. Boy, talk about spinning the truth. You know, it's more like we're willing to shut down the government in order to make sure our predatory, greedy, wealthy owners can make as much money as they can or for the health of Americans. Yeah, some fucking spin. Why, you know, old Joe Goebbels would be very proud of today's wrong-wing propaganda machine. Anyhow, with Congress having failed to agree by late September 2013 on the budget for fiscal year beginning October 1st, members of the Senate proposed a resolution to continue funding the government at sequestration levels through December 2013 as a stopgap measure, you know, to allow more time to negotiate over final funding levels for the full fiscal year. However, Republican Senators Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and others then demanded a delay of or change to the Affordable Care Act in exchange for passing the resolution. And on September 24th, Cruz gave a 21-hour speech in the Senate to draw attention to his goals. Yeah, draw attention to his goals. I mean, give me a fucking break. During his 20-hour stand-up comedy routine, he read Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. He sang the praises of White Castle hamburgers, did a Darth Vader imitation, and quoted from the reality TV show Duck Dynasty. And yes, he did talk about Obamacare, or more exactly, he talked and talked and talked. Yet, when his stunt, and make no mistake, it was a fucking stunt. When it ended, he was no closer to killing Obamacare than he was when he began. In fact, when he was done and a bill to fund the government with Obamacare was voted on in the Senate, Ted Cruz voted for it. You know, kind of like having his fucking cake and eating it too. But let's get serious here. Ted Cruz's stunt was not about Obamacare. It was about ego. Ego and money. Over the last quarter, the third quarter, the one which included his advertorial, Ted Cruz raised $1.9 million and at least $222,000 in the week following his shtick. Plus, he's become the new darling for the Tea Party, being touted by such illustrious dingbats as Sarah Palin as presidential timber. Anyhow, as the shutdown loomed on September 27th, the Washington Post reported that several Republican members of Congress made public statements expressing approval of the impending shutdown. Representative Michelle Bachmann said, "We're very excited. It's exactly what we wanted, and we got it. People will be very grateful. Representative John Culberson said, "It's wonderful. We're 100% united." In an interview with Fox News host Sean Hannity, Bachmann said that she believes there has been strong unity between conservatives on almost every budget vote, and added, "This is about the happiest I've seen members in a long time, because we see we are starting to win this dialogue on a national level." People will be very grateful. Republicans and Tea Partiers are starting to win on Obamacare on a national level. I mean, talk about fucking delusion. I mean, what reality do these wrong-wingers live in? Anyhow, the deadlock centered on the continuing appropriations resolution of 2014, which was passed by the House of Representatives on September 20th, 2013. The Senate stripped the bill of the measures related to the Affordable Care Act and passed it in revised form on September 27, 2013. The House reinstated the Senate removed measures and passed it again in the early morning hours on September 29th. The Senate declined to pass the bill with measures to delay the Affordable Care Act, and the two legislative houses did not develop a compromise bill by the end of September 30th, 2013, causing the federal government to shut down due to a lack of appropriated funds at the start of the new 2014 federal fiscal year, commencing on October 1st, 2013. I mean, talk about a fucking pissing contest. The shutdown lasted until October 17th, and during it, many government services and agencies were closed, suspended, or otherwise impacted, resulting in monuments dedicated to veterans being closed, 800,000 civilian military workers being furloughed, partial closures of the Departments of Commerce, Education, Energy, the Interior, Transportation, Labor, Justice, and Homeland Security, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency and IRS. Full closures impacted the Office of Inspector General, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Election Commission, the Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, and, of note, the Office of Government Ethics. And there were a lot of other government-related agencies and employees impacted. All in all, and importantly, according to an estimate from Standard & Poor's, the Republican and Tea Party-caused shutdown took $24 billion out of the U.S. economy and reduced projected fourth-quarter GDP growth from 3% to 2.4%. So tell me again, why are the Republicans and Tea Partiers thought to be fiscally conservative and financially responsible? Because seriously, there's no fucking way that they are. Well, unless, of course, you're already loaded to the gills with bucks and looking to keep as much of it as you can while not being prevented from stealing more from the public trough. Anyhow, the events leading up to the end of the shutdown involve Republicans in the Senate, namely Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, concluding that the Republican Tea Party House leadership strategy had gone awry. This then led to quiet negotiations between Republican Senator Lamar Alexander and Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer that resulted in an agreement on October 14th between Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and McConnell. Speaker of the House John Boehner persuaded McConnell to delay a Senate vote, hoping to rally his own caucus to end the shutdown on their own terms. But, surprise, surprise, two bills proposed by Boehner failed to receive full caucus support. I mean, what a fucking wimp. I mean, makes you think Boehner was made Speaker purely because he was so weak. Anyhow, because he didn't have a majority of the Republican caucus behind him, Boehner did not bring anything to the House floor, creating an impasse and yielding any chance to end the shutdown to the Senate. On October 16th, Reid and McConnell advanced their proposal, which would fund the government through January 15, 2014, at sequestration levels, and suspend the debt limit until February 7, 2014. It passed 81 to 18, with, of course, all 18 nay votes coming from Republican and Tea Party senators. With hours to go before the government went into default, Speaker Boehner admitted in a radio interview, "We fought the good fight, we just didn't win." Huh? Fought the good fight? Just didn't win? Tell me that this doesn't sound like what many in the former Confederate States say about losing the fucking Civil War. Hello? Oh, it was a good fight. And guess what? You fucking lost. On October 16th, the House voted to approve the Senate's plan. Every Democrat voted in favor of it. Well, all except 2 who didn't vote. And 87 Republicans also voted for it, including Boehner and Cantor. Paul Ryan, the Republican Tea Party candidate for vice president in 2012, along with 143 other seditionists, voted no. President Obama signed the bill just after midnight on October 17th, reopening our government. So now it's Friday, October 25th, 2013, and where are we? Well, not surprisingly, Republicans and Tea Partiers attempting to blame the shutdown on Obama and Democrats when it was they who planned and caused it. And every chance they got, they held photo ops, trying to show how caring they are, caring about World War II veterans not being able to get into World War II memorials, caring about tourists not being able to get into national parks. I mean, what a load of crap. Hell, I mean, if they cared about veterans, they'd be proposing legislation to help returning vets find jobs and receive benefits related to training and their health. A number of polls reveal that Americans are holding Republicans and Tea Parties primarily responsible for the shutdown. And an ABC News Washington Post poll found that a new high of 74% of Americans disapprove of the way the Republicans and Tea Parties in Congress are handling Washington's budget crisis, far exceeding disapproval of both President Obama and congressional Democrats on the issue. Personally, I don't give a crap about approval or disapproval ratings because of the high rate with which incumbents are returned to office. And I don't place much weight on forecasts made a year or so before people vote, as many things can happen in the interim. Republican and Tea Party-controlled states continue to strip voters of their rights, and they continue to do whatever they can to suppress the vote of those who are likely not to vote for them. Requiring new forms of ID, eliminating or restricting early voting, reducing the number of polling places and polling staff. And this doesn't even consider their rigging of elections some other way, as they may have done in Florida in 2000. I mean, hanging chads, anyone? No. I mean, I don't place much importance on approval-disapproval ratings, and my mother taught me not to count chickens before they hatch. Besides, high disapproval for Republicans and Tea Parties and predictions of Democrats winning back the House might result, once again, in Democrats, liberals, and progressives falling asleep and thinking that the election is in their bag, just as they may have done in 2010. So, don't take anything for granted. Republicans and Tea Partiers are showing signs of infighting and self-destruction. But we can't count on this preventing them from holding on to the House and continuing to hold America and Americans hostage to their obsession with greed and power. So let's vote these Republicans and Tea Party bastards out in 2014. We need a net gain of 17 seats in the House. So let's target districts where the Republican Tea Party candidate is vulnerable and doesn't have a lock thanks to redistricting. And let's make sure we hold the Senate. And let's take back state governments lost in 2010. So again, make sure you vote. And make sure you get others to vote. And make sure you get people registered and with proper ID. And make sure they can get to the polls. And stay with them, because Republicans and Tea Partiers will do whatever they can to make people turn away from long lines and waits. Yes, Let's vote these obstructionists out of office, and let's give President Barack Obama in his last 2 years what he had in his first 2 years, a cooperative and supportive Congress. We, as a nation, accomplished a lot in those first 2 years, and progress was achieved, and we began to recover from the mess that W left us. Imagine what we as a nation can accomplish in Obama's last 2 years with a cooperative and supportive Congress. Meanwhile, however, we need to recognize that the end of the recent shutdown didn't end the manufacturing of crises by Republicans and Tea Partiers in Congress. The government is only funded to January 15, 2014, and the debt limit is only suspended until February 7, 2014. If we've come to expect anything from Republicans and Tea Partiers in Congress over the past 4 or so years, especially given how many times they tried to repeal, defund, delay, and otherwise dismantle Obamacare, it's that they will try to hold the government hostage time and again in order to enrich themselves and their wealthy owners. There's only one way to stop them. Vote them out in 2014. So, until our next WTF News, this is Dan Gersten. Thank you for watching.